morning, everyone. Ooh, as long as I've been doing this, I still get so nervous, y'all. I have performance anxiety. I've had it since college. Oh my gosh. But I'm so excited to be here with you all. This is such a great crowd and such a pleasure. I look forward to introducing myself, the exhibition, and really getting into this theme because I have my own interpretation of it, of course. But I wanted to first start by just saying, you know, my background has been different than most in museums, especially in the art museums. Unlike many of my colleagues who usually have a background in art or art history specifically, my background is actually in anthropology and history. And I have this focus on public history in particular because I love understanding people. I love understanding experience and being able to translate that to our public, to our general public in ways that is inclusive and informative, but also real. Like, I'm just me. Like, I talk how I talk, I am who I am, and I know that about myself, right? So that's gonna inform a lot of what I speak about today. I have a lot of loves in this field. I love African and African diasporic art. That was my entryway into this field. But I also love digital history and new media. I love photography. I'm interested in so many different things that sometimes I get kind of spread thin and I have to like reel it in a little bit, but it's just how I kind of operate. And so I get asked what my day-to-day consists of pretty often, and it's honestly mostly feeling stressed about like the small details of all these moving parts, and you all will see that in the exhibition we're gonna view today. And like, I kind of have a problem with questioning myself for joining this field and like choosing this path. I actually chose it when I was a teenager. I was 14. I was a freshman in high school, and I decided to pursue this career in museums. Very strong-headedly. I'm an Aries. It was actually my birthday the other day. And anybody that knows me, I have a big old ram on my back, and I'm like an Aries to the T. Like, I know exactly what I want all the time. And I read about anthropology in a textbook, and I went to Google what you can do with that. And museum curator was like the first result. It's like the top result when you Google what you can do with anthropology. But even before that, there were all these signs that this is what I was gonna do. I was obsessed with Barbie houses when I was a kid. Anybody who's read my bio knows that I talk about that a little bit. I didn't really care about the dolls too much. I think those were like, like, I'm not gonna ever look like that, I don't want to. But I loved the houses. I loved this idea of putting these pieces together. And so I was like an intense kid. I would like glue the pieces to each other. So imagine this little like 6-year-old girl with this dollhouse with these plastic pieces and a bunch of Elmer's glue, and I would like sit there and be obsessed with it. And literally yesterday, my mom texted me in the middle of a tour, and she's like, you know, I'm like throwing away all your old toys. And I was like, Mom, wait a minute, girl. Okay, you can do everything but the dollhouse. I need to keep the dollhouse. It's a 1998 Barbie dream house. Like, you can't throw that away. That's my career. And so that's really how I got my start. And it's these like little things that you just kind of notice about yourself, right? Like, you see it in yourself. And that was I saw it in myself. Like, this interpretation, this idea that I could make a space and really create it for myself. And then I would host these showings and I could talk about it and I could talk about my decisions. And so anyway, I just didn't recognize that until like much later, like when I was about, you know, in college, and my boss asked me about it, and she was like, how did you know this about yourself? And I'm like, I don't know, it was there, it was always a light. Anyway, I didn't have too many examples of what being a museum curator could even look like for someone like me. You know, I'm this younger, Black, queer, Southern woman, and I'm bold and loud and expressive. And my closest inspiration growing up was Miss Janetta B. Cole. I don't know if you all are familiar with her, but she is like the god to me. Like, this Black woman anthropologist and former museum director was really the only person I could call back, and I actually learned about her from my Aunt Gloria. My Aunt Gloria taught at Spelman when Janetta B. Cole was there, and was like, Maya, if you're going to be serious about museums, if you're going to do this, that's who you should look to. And other than her, I didn't really have much guidance about how to enter this field or really even exist in it. It was less so about getting there. It was more about, okay, I get there and then what, you know? So I did a lot of independent research. I talked myself up to whoever would listen and give me a chance. I got a job at UNC where I attended school during my freshman year at the Visitor Center. That's how I became a public speaker 9 years ago. And then I got a job at the school's library. I've always had 2 jobs my entire life. It's hardworking, I guess, but I worked at the school's library as a gallery assistant in this old library called Wilson Library at UNC. And that is really how I started to piece my life together. It was like a step-by-step kind of process of me just like, okay, if I'm gonna do this, I need to put myself in the best position to do so. Anyway, so back in the day, my mom actually wanted me to be an engineer because I was on this track in high school and always had an interest in working with design, but that really wasn't me. Like it didn't feel like me. I wanted something different, and I'm so proud of myself for sticking to my guns because it's afforded me so many opportunities like this one to learn and grow as a curator and as a person. My largest project to date has been the NTMA's collection reinstallation, which we're sitting in partially, which I was hired to assist with 3 years ago now. This project included restructuring all of our galleries to give an equitable representation of the collection. And we strive for equity instead of equality, and that's important to know the distinction, because the collections are diverse in size and media, and it was like putting this puzzle together. You know, it's funny, I had a real full circle moment during our planning because we had a model of the museum, this big model made out of styrofoam that we called the dollhouse, y'all. And we used it to figure out where we would place all the artwork. And so I'm like, okay, I started with dollhouses and now here I am, you know, all these years later, still working with dollhouses. Isn't that cute? So adorable. And so being that I work in contemporary art, I was also responsible for acquiring work for the museum from racially and gender diverse communities to support our inclusivity. So far I've acquired work from folks like Willie Cole and all kinds of places, people, we have an upcoming acquisition from Ernie Barnes that we're hopeful for. So it's things like that where you're doing so much work to bring people in who have not been represented in the museum before. So it's really, really exciting. My latest curatorial work has involved considering legacies and longevity, particularly when there isn't always a guide for what you want to accomplish, which is so fitting for my personal journey, of course, as I just said. And there's no better example of this than the Ruth E. Carter Afrofuturism and Costume Design, which I've been so fortunate to be a part of. She is amazing. She is lovely and just such a great person. The exhibition is a culmination of her life's work as a designer, artist, philanthropist, and leader. It's a testament to her longevity in her field, as well as her ability to adapt and continuously develop her craft. The exhibition features over 60 costumes across 4 decades. And so for those unfamiliar with Ruth, I wanted to give some background about her. She was born in 1960 in Springfield, Massachusetts. She's the youngest of 8 children. She received her bachelor's degree in theater arts from Hampton University, back then it was known as Hampton Institute, in Hampton, Virginia, 1982. Initially, Ruth pursued acting, but didn't make it into one of the plays, and so she was then asked to work in the wardrobe department, which led her to discover the art of costume design, right? And there was no specific program for costume design, but Ruth navigated this through her general love for theater and performing arts. She moved to Los Angeles in 1986, where she met director Spike Lee at the Los Angeles Theater Center. He asked her to work on his second film and first studio film, School Days, an all-time favorite of mine. Her earliest inspirations came from literature, mostly poets and authors whose language she found herself in. And like me, her main inspiration came from a single person. That was costume designer Palmer Brown, who worked on A Different World. So that's always so interesting to me to think about how we got from A Different World and Palmer to Ruth Carter and all of these different films. It's just this interesting track that can happen like that. And so you have this singular person to recall to if you need to, but with such a unique entry into the field, it can feel a lot different for you. It can feel very isolating. So what do you do with yourself, right? Do you lean away from what you're called to do, or do you step into it boldly and completely as yourself? And so this career retrospective reflects all of these questions, and I've been thinking about it as a lesson in taking the lead in your life, in your legacy, especially as a Black woman who has so much to fight against, both personally and professionally. How you move in your life is so important, and how you navigate this is so important. So anyway, in all of this, I know you're probably thinking, Maya, what does this have to do with corruption, girl? Like, what are we talking about? If you were thinking this would be about like money laundering or like the Illuminati, like this, not that, and I'm not that girl to give that conversation. This is more about the second definition of corruption for me. So Merriam-Webster describes the second definition of corruption as a departure from the original or from what is pure or correct. Another definition is debasement or alteration, right? And so as a curator and writer, I like to finesse. I like to bend words to my liking. Therefore, I interpret this definition as a challenge to convention or what has been. And so between Ruth and I, the examples are pretty clear about how we've been able to come into fields not designed for us to exist safely or at the forefront. And so Ruth often mentions, this history of filmmaking where Black women served as background characters or comedic relief pretty often. We were relegated to the margins and most certainly weren't behind the camera like she gets to be. She gets to have her voice heard behind the camera in a way that is so interesting to me, because she's like, no, I don't like that, change it. Or no, we have to fix that. Like yesterday I was watching her take all these phone calls and she's like, send me pictures. I need to know what's going on. And like that kind of like just boss, that kind of like attitude is just like something you strive for your whole life, And that's why with her numerous collaborations, especially with directors like Spike Lee and Keenen Ivory Wayans, she's been able to prioritize having her voice heard. And I really, really appreciate that from her, because many of her earliest collaborations were these kind of independent projects where the filmmakers sought to make changes they wanted to see in production. So that included having an authentic visual story through clothing. So like think about films like Do the Right Thing or Malcolm X that are rooted in very specific cultural understandings and authenticity. There's a sense of liberation that comes from being allowed to just be and define how you want people to view your work, as well as how they view you as a person. It's led to Carter becoming one of the most celebrated designers to ever work in film. Her name is synonymous with bold colors and detailed craftsmanship. She's cited as an innovator of 3D printing for costumes, particularly for like Black Panther, leading to her making history as the first Black woman to win 2 Academy Awards, which is insane in our day and time, but still, nonetheless, an achievement. She also has numerous other accolades that all came from listening to her instincts and challenging what people knew about period clothing, visual texture, and general design for films. For me, the museum field hasn't been the friendliest either. Everything from the physical location of these buildings where we literally are sitting today to what has been prioritized in art has been oppressive. And so I guess this also fits with that first definition of corruption that Joel mentioned, where there is this, whether conscious or subconscious, exclusion. There's something trying to get you down. There's something trying to make you feel like you don't belong. And so I guess it is a well-rounded conversation about that. And so I don't know, when I was talking to Joel about what I wanted to speak on today and how I wanted to approach the topic, the only thing I kept thinking about is like, imagine if I didn't know myself. Imagine if I didn't have the support system I have. Some of my best friends are in this room right now. Some of the people that I look up to are in this room right now. I'd be an engineer. I'd be an engineer, and I'm bad at math, y'all. So like that wasn't gonna work. That wasn't gonna work for me. I wasn't gonna make it. So anyway, so my takeaways while I wrap up with you all is, once you recognize these histories and decide you are bold enough to continue on, what comes next? That's a question I want to pose to you all. What comes next when you decide you are who you are? What I've learned since working on this exhibition and in my career in general is that you have to be willing to take the risk. as hard and as corny as that sounds, you have to be willing to do that. More than that, and Ruth talks about this so eloquently, and we had this conversation the other day, you have to be willing to advocate for others. As much as you advocate for yourself, if you want to see true change, it really includes other people. And it's this simultaneous focus on community that really gets us to where we want to be. And so anyway, I want to thank you all so much for sharing space with me and just being here. I'm so grateful. Thank you to Creative Mornings. Thank you, Joel, for our conversation and just your leadership. Thank you all so much. And I'm going to pause and open up to some discussion with you all before we head over to the exhibition in East Building. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Maya. That was incredible. Just another round of applause.
Thank you.
I'm like taking notes on my phone, and I look up and I'm like seeing how many people are just feverishly scribbling notes as you're talking. That is a profound testament to you as a speaker. I will pass mics for a Q&A, so bear with me as I navigate the room. Who would like to ask a question?
Don't be shy now, y'all. I'm gonna open up myself, so y'all need to come on now.
Thank you, Maya. I'm very curious. You made me think of another C word, compromise, between corruption and authenticity. I'm really interested in hearing about, have you had an artistic challenge that sticks out to you where you had to compromise and it's still like weighs on you?
I gotta be careful. Because yes, a lot. Being that I work in contemporary art, working with living artists. So there's this saying in museums that the deader the better. I hate that saying, but my colleagues will say that all the time because they don't have to work with living artists. You know, all their artists are dead, so they don't get no opinions. My artists, I love you all so much, have so many opinions. And so I'm constantly having to compromise, especially when it comes to being that I write about artists without their, consultation. I have to be careful about how I talk about people and how I approach their work, especially if it goes against what they had intended for their work. So I think the biggest challenge I've had is how do I translate this to the public, but also give my perspective, but also respect the artist's wishes and their perspective. So that's where compromise comes in a lot. And then you'll have someone, like I had one of my friends is an artist and she was featured in my first show, and she calls me and she's like, Maya, who wrote this label? And I was like, I'm in trouble. And it was me. And she was like, okay, I'm glad it was you, because I was talking as if it was my first show, so I'm new. I was talking as if, I'm a Black woman, so I'm speaking about Black perspectives and Black art. And for me, it's just natural, it's how I talk anyway. But she was reading it as if someone else had wrote it at the institution. Mind you, I'm the only Black curator here. I'm the first Black curator here. So she was nervous that someone else had wrote it and was projecting that onto her work. And I was like, no, it was me. It was me, don't worry, it was me. And so it's like those kind of compromises where someone can just call you and be like, you don't have this right, or where is this coming from? Where did you pull this from? That's really, it's a big challenge for me.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Genesis. Happy to be here. One of the questions that I really wanted to ask, and it might sound super cliche, but as a Black creator, just knowing who you are, being confident who you are, it's hard to say one thing, but what is something that you've done for yourself to sort of beat imposter syndrome and the whole corruption of it all? I'm a designer, but one of the things that I kind of talk against myself is maybe I'm not worthy, or I don't have a degree in this, or whatnot. So I just wanted to know, how do you beat that or kind of fight it?
Yeah. That's a good question. Thank you so much for that question. Because I talk about that a lot in my work, especially being younger and I don't have a PhD. A lot of folks have PhDs in this field. I didn't go to this blue blood school like Yale or NYU and stuff like that. That also gets to you sometimes in museums. Or before this job, I didn't travel like that. People are like, oh yeah, I went to Venice and Yugoslavia. I'm like, okay girl. I went to the Bahamas when I was 16. okay? Like, you're not special. And so you have to beat it not only on an individual level, but this is where community comes in. And this is why I emphasize that in this talk. Like, yes, I can do all the work to ensure myself and just make sure that I'm speaking positive and I say my affirmations, I pray, I'm very spiritual, like I do all the things, and it's still not enough sometimes. Even now, like I have this career, I love what I do, but I still get like, am I doing the right thing? I told you I get nervous even talking, like, am I doing the right thing? And so that's where community comes in. And I have a great support system of people that love me and like tell me like, I see you, or you're doing things, or you're here, and that makes me proud. And so yeah, community. Sorry, I'm like getting choked up. Like I really love my people, so yeah. Thank you for that.
I think I can be loud. Playing an integral part in reimagining this physical space. What is the thing that you want people to know about this museum and the art that's in it?
Yeah, I want people to, now that there's this kind of new level of how we're interpreting the work, just kind of the cross-collection talk we're doing, the dialogues that we're forming, that was a big part of the process for us, was to like really think about how the art speaks to each other. And especially like certain continents, like Africa was separated for the longest time in the galleries, and now it's back, and it has even bigger real estate in the museum. And we've put Egypt back into Africa. Like little things like that it's like, duh, like Egypt is in Africa. But it's something that gets separated at museums because of the really racism and the level of racism and white supremacy that happens in museums. And so like having this reshuffling has helped us to reestablish that and like really think through that. And so I really hope people are looking at those connections and making them. And there's been people who don't like the reinstallation because it's shaken them a little bit. They're like used to seeing certain things in certain places and used to seeing certain conversations. We got asked why there's so much contemporary art, and I'm like, well, we're living the contemporary, so yeah. Or like why we have this focus on buying contemporary art, and it's like because we need to have different conversations and different people need to be included in these conversations. And so I hope people leave with that understanding.
I think it looks great.
Thank you.
I loved at Art and Bloom getting to be like, weird, that moves.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. It wasn't just me. Thank you to the curators. They're not here, but I love them. Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
Hi, Maya.
Who's up? Hi. Sorry. Hi.
Hi, I'm Camille. So my question is, because I have this issue myself with having my own show and so on, is that sometimes when you're focusing or making sure that you're showing marginalized voices that normally are ignored, that it ends up being like, oh, it must be a black thing, it must be only a black show, it must be only black art, and black artists don't always paint just images of black people.
Right.
So how do you kind of navigate that and make sure that you're not being pigeonholed and only representing the black part of the show or the black artist in a negative way, that it should be something that is celebrated and they should just be artists, not always having that extra label with everything that you have to do?
Yeah. That's a great question, because I get that a lot too. It's like, because I've studied African and African diasporic art, I was like really cautious of being pigeonholed, and I was questioning whether I was doing it because I'm black or if it's because I like it and I love that I like it. But one thing that I like to focus on in the work is intersectionality and understanding how intersecting identities and the places where our identities meet matters just as much as any other aspect of our experience. And that it's a well-rounded experience. It's not just about being black, it's about being a black woman, being a queer black woman, being Southern or something, like there's these levels to our identity that matter just as much as our race. And so to get away from just the conversation, and not that I want to, because that is my focus, and I'm sure like sometimes it can be your focus too, like being able to see that fullness in ourselves is what matters.
Kind of piggyback on that. Sometimes even though you want to bring those people into the space, other people may not watch because they're like, oh, that must be just for them.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for that to be spoken about, that just because there's a lot of black people doesn't mean everyone's not welcome.
Yeah, and I think too, what I've learned in my career is that the work is gonna resonate who it resonates with. I've had to let that go a lot in my life. Like, wanting to include everybody because I was stressing myself out about it. Like, it was literally making me sick. Like, I can't. I'm not getting the views. I'm not getting the visitors. I'm not connecting with people. But I had to let it go and just realize, like, I'm here doing this for me. I'm here doing this for my people. I'm here doing this for the people who care. And so whoever the work needs to be viewed by, it will be viewed by them. They're going to seek me out. They're going to find me, and they have so far. So yeah, that is the grace you have to extend to yourself too in this field, is that who you align with will align with you. Thank you.
Maya, as a Black queer woman, but more importantly as Maya Brooks, in an industry where very few people look like you, what recommendation do you have to make this industry more inclusive now and for the next generation?
Not you asking me to solve white supremacy, man. I don't know. No. I mean, I think it's, there are different ways to approach this kind of dilemma because it doesn't end. And I think people think that, like, once you get one face in the room that you've solved it all. I've actually been asked that. I got asked if I felt like a token here at the museum one time. And it was like the most hurtful question because, like, of course I do. Like, of course I don't feel all the way included, even, though I've been here and I do the work that I do. And so it doesn't get solved with just one person. It's not a plug and play. I think that's the problem. It's really about changing culture. And to change culture, you have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge that there's a systemic issue, that there's a systemic exclusion of people that look like us, that there's a systemic silencing of people that look like us. Because even when we get into the spaces that we want to get into, there's a purposeful way that people treat you and make you feel and ostracize you. So you have to get to that root before you can ever even imagine solving or alleviating or helping a problem. And you can only do so much. And what I had to learn too, as one person, it doesn't always fall just on me. Like, I need support, I need help, and I need advocacy. People want to talk about allyship and being an ally, but also we need advocacy. I need someone to advocate for me just as much as I'm advocating for myself. So I think that's where it starts and comes from, is acknowledging that and acknowledging the culture that surrounds these issues. Yeah, thank you.
Good morning, Maya. Thanks for the encouragement. You talked about being an Aries and what's next. I'd love to know what your dream curation or project or exhibition might be.
I'm actually working on it. So at SICA, at our sister institution in Winston-Salem, I have been loving fiber art lately, and so I actually have a fiber art exhibition opening this fall in November, and it has been the best exploration of identity and culture and people and queerness and love and community and all of these things through fiber. I think the biggest thing for me is I always want to stay like one step ahead, and that's kind of hard to do because you have to do a lot of like planning for that. Like, for people that don't know how we curate a show, like exhibitions are usually thought of like years to like a year in advance. And so like this has been a really fast exhibition for me. So I've only had like 6 months to get this idea ready, which is quick. And so like, this is this kind of stuff I want to be working on. I think eventually too, I would love to get more into the digital space. That's where I really have my love, but that also is very fast moving and fast paced, so you have to be ahead of the curve on it. But yeah, I think that's what, I don't know. And then I'm kind of, as an Aries, I'm really in the moment. So it's honestly gonna just hit me one day and I'll be like, okay, I wanna do this today, and then it'll be done. Thank you.
Aren't specifically made to be in a museum, like costumes.
Yeah.
And how do you go about, is there a creative process you have for making those pieces seem less altered in a sterile setting, like a museum?
Yeah, I think you have to restructure how you think about museums a little bit too when you're thinking about costume design, because I love that Ruth talks about her work as like wearable art. And so that's how I've been programming myself to think about it too. It's not that it's just costume, it's literally art. It's art you wear. So I think you have to get past art just being this thing you stick up on the wall and that's it first. And then also thinking about museums and longevity, we have this obsession with preservation in museums. We want things to last forever. We want things to translate forever, and they just don't. And that's okay. But I think that comes from me working in like new media too. Like I work with a lot of like AI and like stuff that hasn't really been thought of or tested yet. And so when you work with these kind of different forms, you realize that art is open, it's expansive, it's so many different things. And if you want to see it in a museum, put it in there. And like I said before, like it'll translate and it'll work with who it needs to work for. And like, that's it. But you have to be willing to like take that chance. And if it doesn't land, that's when you adjust. You put out the show, you put out the work, and if it doesn't land the way you want it to, then you go, okay, how can we restructure this? Maybe we have to build it into a room. Maybe we have to change the venue. Maybe it wasn't right for this museum. Maybe it's right somewhere else. Maybe it's not a art thing. Maybe it's a history thing. Maybe it's a civic center thing. Maybe, you know, then you take that process after the fact. But if you don't try it, I mean, I'm sorry to be so corny, but if you don't even take the shot, you will never know. So yeah.
So selfishly, I'm going to ask the last question. So my background's in architecture, and there's been plenty of spaces over the traveling to Italy and so on that you were saying your friends talking about that like spoke to me, or like, wow, this is incredible. But there have been those few moments experiencing spaces that's sort of the way that I see the world that just sort of left me speechless. Like it's still hard to describe like the impact that those spaces have on me now. So I'm curious for you, are there any pieces or collections that you're like still reckoning with how incredible they impacted, I mean, how much they impacted you in your career, or artists that you'd like to put on in the spotlight?
Yeah, I'll give this story. So how I got interested in art, I was a kid. So I'm from Atlanta, Georgia originally. I grew up going downtown. My aunt's church is actually right next to the High Museum of Art. She's a Presbyterian, so it's First Presbyterian. And we would take these field trips to the High, and this artist, Miss Annie Green, I love me some Annie Green. She was put into the High, at the time had this, which I don't really like, but it was a folk art gallery. Miss Annie Green does yarn art, and so she makes these beautiful scenes of Black life using yarn and string. And I'll never forget, it was this detail in one of the pieces. It was a hoop earring she made out of gold string, and that to this day, like almost 20 years later, sticks in my brain, is how someone can take something so everyday, like yarn, and really make it into this big thing. And then for her to be from Georgia like me, to be a Black woman, to be talking about our life, our everyday, our reality, that's really what sticks with me to this day. Like I could see a million other pieces of artwork and I will still go back to that gold hoop earring by Miss Annie Green. Yeah, thank you Joel. Thank y'all so much. Thank you.